I have to confess that sometimes I'm dull of hearing and slow-witted, and it struck me that that was really the case when you read from the Dewey Reams version of the Bible last week, Mary. Um, I completely missed the point. I focused on testament being the same as will,
Mhm.
which is true, but I didn't focus on where testament was used. So let's begin by reading the uh, Revised Standard Version, in my case, of this section of Hebrews. And
Right.
then let's read. You can read from your rendition in Dewey Reams, and
I have both of them here. So,
uh, and then we can sort of tackle that issue of testament versus covenant head on, since it's really an important one,
ooh,
and I think really helps us to understand Hebrews in a more profound way. So let's read first from chapter 9, verses 15 through 22.
mhm.
Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Since a death has occurred which redeems them from the transgressions under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Hence, even the first covenant was not ratified without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Would you like to
Yes,
read,
mine
Mary?
has quite a bit that's different. Just different wording. So I'll start at 15. And therefore, he is the mediator of the New Testament, that by means of his death, for the redemption of those transgressions which were under the former testament, they that are called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. For where there is a testament, the death of the testator must of necessity come in. For a testament is of force after men are dead. Otherwise, it is as yet of no strength whilst the testator lives. Whereupon neither was the first indeed dedicated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been read by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the testament which God hath enjoined unto you." The tabernacle also and all the vessels of the ministry in like manner he sprinkled with blood. And almost all things according to the law are cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no remission.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
It's good. It's good. So the nice thing about that is that it adopts the notion of testament for the entire passage. So it starts with testament in chapter 9, verse 15, and carries it through 22, whereas in most current translations, the notion of testament is adopted only in verses 16 and 17,
ah,
and in verses 15 and 18 through
mhm.
the end, covenant is resumed again. So, given that, if testament is applied consistently to the first testament or the Sinaitic testament and the New Testament. What is the problem with that? Does anyone see the really dramatic, glaring problem with that?
So are you saying with the first covenant with Abraham?
No, with at Sinai. If we treat Sinai as the Sinaitic covenant as a
Oh,
testament,
okay.
which is what the author is doing.
Sorry, Ron, in your version though, where does it say testament?
In Mary's version,
Oh, okay,
in
so
Julie Reams.
in
I'm
ours,
reading
it
from the
does not,
Septuagint, which he used.
right. Oh, okay. Yeah, because
Yeah.
mine doesn't have testament at all.
This is like Ron's.
Sure, yours has testament.
I don't see it. Which
In verse 16,
16 for where a will is involved.
well, yeah,
That's
it
one.
uses will. It uses will instead of testament, but it's the
Oh.
same thing.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so here the question is, so starting just with verse 15, which is sort of adequate, and therefore he is the mediator of the New Testament, that by means of his death, for the redemption of those transgressions which were under the former testament, that they are called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. So the redemption of those transgressions which were under the former testament, so that's the covenant at Sinai
With
and
Moses.
with
Oh.
Moses.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the first testament. And then we have the New Testament. Okay, now what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the treating Sinai as a testament?
The only blood that was shed was animals.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you compare it to Christ's blood on the cross, he was divine.
And it had
Yeah.
to be redone over and over.
For Moses's, yeah.
The establishment of a testament requires the death of the testator, right?
Mhm.
Yes. And who died? Only the animals
Moses,
died.
yeah, Moses didn't die.
No.
In the first one, who died?
The
Moses.
animals.
Well, that's the problem. No, but well, you would have to argue. So here's the problem. That sacrifice is not the death of the testator. That sacrifice is a promise that the testator will be punished and die in the event that the covenant is broken. So now, if we treat but that's a covenant. A testament or a will requires a death. They said that, and there are no substitutions. I mean, if I make a will and I sacrifice my dog,
No
it
good.
doesn't matter. There are no substitutions. You can't substitute for a testament because it's not a covenant. So they're saying that this is a testament. That means somebody must have died.
So God must have died, and
God must
God's
have
not
died.
dying.
God must have died. Exactly. And so therefore, Jesus cannot be the Son of God because God is dead.
God in
In
his
their
human.
In their
No. The Sinai covenant was between God and the Israelites.
right.
Since the Israelites are alive, it has to have been God that's dead. Right?
not right, but in their thinking, yes.
Well, I'm pointing to the defective translation.
Yes.
The logical implication of the translation is that God is dead. And therefore, there can be no new covenant because there can be no Son of God. So, this is just some guy dying on the cross. So, all of which underscores the fact that, we have to be very, very careful with translations and very, very cognizant of the fact that we're reading a translation and that translation reflects the translator's understanding of the author's understanding, or I wouldn't even go, or in some cases, simply the translator's understanding of the words of the text divorced from the author's understanding. Does that make sense? It's really important, so especially if we're, sort of going to, focus on individual words or phrases or, prioritize them.
This is a good example to come back to for that, for what happens.
Mm-hmm. So, and so then again, to get back into the author's frame of mind, I mean, we live in such an individualistic society, and Western Catholicism has become in many ways very individualistic as well. Do I go to heaven? That's, sort of an individual thing. But the author isn't concerned with individual things. He's concerned with liturgy, worship, the cult, and the relationship of the people of God to God. So the question is, as an individual, do you want to join the people of God, or do you want to turn your back on the people of God? But after that, he's concerned with the people of God. He's concerned with liturgy. And the hard thing about that is that we don't see, I think, very often, we don't see the meaning, profound meaning of the liturgy. We don't see ourselves as drawn into the liturgy in a very closely integrated way. And, we see ourselves as sort of individuals participating in the liturgy. But all of that is not what the author is talking about. That's a very, sort of modern concept, and one that in many ways is very, very problematic. It's sort of part of what has gone wrong. I mean, for me, I've really only discovered this in, this rendition of the class, and it's kind of a work in progress, because I think, we're all taught to think individually in some form. I mean, there are varying degrees, but it's an important thing to, sort of try to get to. I think it's very helpful, to try to adopt the author's mode of thinking, which is that we are a people of God. So in any case, so we have the Dewey-Reams translation, which goes overboard. I guess it has the virtue, at least, of being consistent in this passage, of applying testament throughout. So that at least makes a certain amount of sense, even though the implications of it are pretty catastrophic.
George and Thais didn't realize that was from the Septuagint. We read
Actually,
the Septuagint
not
version.
the Septuagint with the New Testament.
Right, we read both.
Yeah, it's called the Dewey-Reams version. So is that all clear so far? So, very simply, if there are two testaments and a testament requires the death of the testator, someone has to have died for the testament to go into effect, because that's what they're saying. So Jesus died for the New Testament to go in effect. The first testament is let's call it testament at Sinai. Nobody died. None of the Israelites died for that testament to go into effect. But there has to be a death for the testament to go into effect. And it can't be a sacrifice, because that's not the death of the testator. So a testator has to have died. And the testator, the person making the covenant and putting it into effect, is God. So therefore, in order to enact the first testament, to bring the first testament into being, God has to have died. That's, I would say, a serious problem with the translation, and an unintended one. You generally don't want to, support the notion that God is dead in the Bible. That would seem to be an inappropriate theological argument. So with that, let's go back to the Revised Standard Version and the other versions. Revised Standard Version, which I know both Carmen and I have, we have verse 15. So therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred which redeems them from the transgressions under the first covenant. So we have covenant there used not once but twice. Then in verse 16, we have the switch, for where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. So what about that? There's the argument of whether that should be covenant or will or testament.
The way they use it, they almost seem like they're the same thing. Why do they use different words, right? And there's a note in here too, in this version, that says, where does it say? It says, in Greek, the Greek word here used means both covenant and will.
Right. Right. The Greek word means both covenant and will, or covenant
Doesn't say it
and
means
testament.
The testament is definitely different.
So the question is, which one is it? And, is that shift from covenant to testament correct? So,
And when you hear like somebody read it well, doesn't it say last testament and will or something like that, right?
right, last will and testament, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there, first of all, in terms of the Greek word is diathéké, and it's used 17 times in Hebrews. It's used only 16 more times than the rest of the entire New Testament. And all 17, or all of those except the ones in verses 16 and 17, are typically translated as covenant. In the language of the Jews in the diaspora, who are Hellenized and speak Greek, diathéké means covenant. In the Septuagint, diathéké is translated as covenant. In secular Greek, diathéké means testament. So translating this as testament would mean that the author has switched from the religious Greek of the diaspora, from the language of the Septuagint, to the language of secular Greek.
So if it's secular, is it more of a legal explanation?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, both are legal,
Yeah.
but so the difference is, so a covenant and a testament, or a covenant and a will, have, some commonalities. They're unilateral decrees made by a party. The difference is that the testament is I'm calling it a decree, but a decree about the disposition of one's personal property. A covenant defines a relationship between two parties with penalty, with blessing, or with the beneficial terms of the covenant and the penalty for the violation of the covenant. And the violation of the covenant is severe. Penalty for the violation of a covenant with God is death. So that's the difference. So
let me say this. Could I think of it as a covenant being an agreement, but not necessarily relating to the need of somebody dying, right?
right,
But a testament and will requires a death to be defined as a testament or will.
Yeah, that's strictly speaking, that in fact isn't true. And so the statement here that for a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive, is untrue. A will takes effect at the moment it's written, signed, and witnessed. That's true in both Roman.
But there's no purpose to it unless there's the anticipation of a death.
Right,
Whereas in the covenant, there's no requirement that the obligation be a death. I guess the fulfillment in a covenant isn't based on death, but the fulfillment of a will, or the creation of a will and the fulfillment of a testament or something like that has to do with the occurrence of a death, or right, something like that.
Right. So a testament or a will anticipates a death.
Mm-hmm.
A covenant anticipates a death only as punishment. A covenant anticipates blessing and a good mutual relationship. But if that doesn't happen, then there's death.
Okay, so that's a covenant strictly related to biblical terms,
Yeah.
as
Right.
opposed to a civil term, I guess, use of the word covenant. Okay.
Right. And covenant is particularly important in the Mideastern context, in Mideastern cultures. It's not important in Hellenistic or Roman cultures. So generally, Mideastern cultures, including pagan cultures, believed in covenants. That's not true. In Greek and Roman culture, there's no covenant with the gods. Remember, Jesus describes pagans as babbling in their prayers. And although we think that's funny, it's not funny. Jesus is very serious. Pagans babble in their prayers because the gods are many. The gods are arbitrary and capricious. You can't count on, their blessing. You don't know exactly how they operate. There are a whole lot of them. They're, frequently in conflict with one another. And the malevolence of the gods can destroy you. And so you want to reach the particular God who will bring blessing to you, who is unknown and whose motivations are unknown in your prayers.
Mhm.
So you had better babble because there are a lot of them, and you had better find the right words to move the right deity. So the result is babbling. Jesus was very, very serious, and that was a very accurate observation. He wasn't being sarcastic, and he wasn't being funny. So in any case, a very different kind of mode of thinking. And so here we have, although he's a Hellenized Jew, he's, very much steeped in the traditions of Judaism and in the Mosaic law, which he has abandoned for Christianity. But he nevertheless has brought into Christianity this liturgical mindset. And indeed, that liturgical mindset is preserved in the Mass, for that matter. So what do we think about that switch from in chapters, in verses rather, 16 and 17, that switch from covenant to will or covenant to testament? Does that make sense? And if it doesn't, how do we understand those verses otherwise?
Well, since Christ died, yeah, I think testament is really the word that should be used.
So
Physically, he died, not spiritually. He's still God. But in our Bible, it says the incarnation and sacrifice of Christ perfected the law, brought to completion the promises of the old covenant.
you're reading the marginal notes.
And redeemed all people from sin once and for all. So
Right.
yeah, this is in the footnotes. It's in the footnotes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
he perfected the law with his death,
Yeah.
which makes sense. So I think they should have used testament.
Well,
or they could start out with covenant and then end up with testament.
yeah, so the problem is, how do you start with covenant and end up with testament? Well, so let's begin by let's go back to Jeremiah, since that's kind of foundational.
It's the purpose to establish something new here, that we're moving from a covenant agreement to a testament or something like that. I mean, there's some kind of transition here that he's trying to emphasize.
Well, the question is he trying to emphasize, or is this a mistranslation? That's the critical question. That's really what I'm asking.
Okay.
So we have a movement for 2 verses. We have testament or will, and for everything else we have covenant. So there's a new covenant, but a new covenant is different than a testament. So going back to Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31, So behold the day, so remember this is prophetic. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke. And I showed myself their master, says the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after these days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it upon their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And we can stop there. So a new covenant written in people's hearts. So the terms of the covenant are written in our hearts, not like the covenant which they broke. What happens when you break a covenant?
You break a relationship because covenants is between peoples.
And what happens when the covenant is with God?
Well, then we break away from God,
No,
separated from God.
no, it's
But
worse
nobody
than that.
dies.
We die.
Well, ultimately, yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily
Die
say
in a sense of
ultimately.
separation, you know, sort of
Right.
like Adam and the original sin. I mean, or physical death, right? I mean,
Well,
you're dead to me. Like,
Ha.
you know,
um,
so you may be alive in this world, but you may be dead to God, right?
let's take a look at, I know that everyone really enjoys this chapter.
Uh-oh. Which one's that?
It's Deuteronomy chapter 28. So there are the terms of the covenant, and then there are the blessings and the penalties of the covenant. The blessings accrue to you if you follow the covenant. The curses accrue to you if you violate the covenant. So Deuteronomy chapter 28, we'll read a few of the blessings and then skip to the curses, since that's what we're focusing on. And if you obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your beasts, the increase of your cattle, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading trough. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. Then we can jump over to curses now. They start in chapter 15, verse 15 of chapter 28 and go on for a long way. We'll just read a sampling. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading trough. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body and the fruit of your ground, the increase of your cattle and the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will send upon you curses, confusion, and frustration in all that you undertake to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly, on account of the evil of your doings, because you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the pestilence cling to you until he has consumed you off the land which you are entering to take possession of it. The Lord will strike you with consumption and with fever, inflammation, and fiery heat, and with drought, and with blasting, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. And the heavens over your head shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. The Lord will make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon you until you are destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. And you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. And your dead body shall be food for all the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth. And there shall be no one to frighten them away. And then there are more. But
Are you doing this just for Halloween?
Yeah, really.
well,
Ah,
Yeah, that's verses 16 through 68 or 15 through 68. That's a lot more curses
ah,
for our blessings.
uh-huh.
ah.
If you remember, we've read that passage multiple times.
Did
We tend to forget that there are curses for violating covenants. That
Oh, well,
is
I should read
kind of
that on Halloween night.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the person who did the translation changed it because Christ had died, trying to say, okay, this is different because Christ has died, and really shouldn't have changed it, but did.
uh-huh.
It's
Right.
just
So
the
let's
thought
kind
of
of go.
the
Let's kind of
scribe.
go back. So remembering the covenant is broken, Jeremiah says, and there will be a new covenant. Penalty for breaking a covenant is death. So then going back, so therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that so a mediator of a new covenant.
So then the old covenant is gone, then it replaces the new covenant. So that's people who were condemned or dead from the first covenant might be revived.
Uh-huh. Right. So we tend to see mediator of a new covenant as relating to private prayer, right? So we can pray to, or even public prayer, or the prayer of the church, that we can pray to Christ who intervenes for us. And although that's true, is that what the author means by mediator here?
That's what a mediator does, right?
Mediator,
They
well,
intercede for you, I guess, right? They mediate. They're
and the question though becomes,
you have a channel of which to make your request.
the question becomes intercede in what way or how? How a mediator is sort of a go-between. What does he go between in?
Well, Moses was between God and the people,
Yeah.
but Moses
And
didn't die. He was just
Moses
not allowed to go into the new land.
Moses was really a mediator as a prophet,
Uh-huh.
but he wasn't the mediator of a covenant, or at least if you can consider him the mediator of a covenant, he wasn't a mediator in the same way as Jesus was. How does Jesus mediate the covenant?
through his death on the cross.
Exactly, he dies. And so therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred which redeems them from the transgressions under the first covenant. So the way in which Jesus has mediated is that he's died. The penalty provided by the old covenant, Mosaic law, the covenant with Moses and the people of God, was broken. The penalty for that is death.
Mhm.
Jesus, as mediator, has gone to the cross to satisfy that penalty,
As well as ours.
as well as ours. He has satisfied the penalty of the old covenant after the covenant has been broken, and satisfied the penalty for violation of the new covenant if it should be broken. And so in that way, he's redeemed the people of the old covenant who remain faithful.
Hmm.
So that's what we were talking about last week with, the people of Israelites being retroactively saved by the cross. And incidentally, although, I just don't want to focus on this a great deal. We can discuss it later. But it's the one case that I can think of where the kingdom of God is affected by an earthly event. So that's mind-boggling. But we can discuss that later. I think we're having enough trouble.
I think also through the Eucharist, he mediates over and over.
Right. Uh-huh. Yeah, very definitely. Okay, so we have the mediator. And then he says, for where, the translation says, for where a will is involved. So we have for where a will is involved, for a will takes effect, hence even the first covenant. So we have logical connectives. So this, for where a will is involved, draws on the previous discussion of covenant. For a will takes effect, draws on the previous discussion of covenant. And then we have hence even the first covenant. And so the hence draws on the two previous verses, which are about testament, and moves back to, or will, and moves back to covenant. So that makes no sense at all, because it violates, the logical. So remember, we've been looking at this throughout. The author of Hebrews has a very tightly woven, is making some very tightly woven theological arguments with multiple connections to previous portions of the letter. So this isn't some guy doing, what is it called, like what is that, free association. Now, there's no free association here. There are no random thoughts. This is a very sophisticated work of theology, along with exhortation mixed in, to serve an apologetic purpose. Where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. So if we change that to for where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who made it, instead of must be established, must be represented by animal sacrifice. So remember, sacrifice. So he's specifically talking about the old covenant here. So therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred which redeems them from the transgressions under the first covenant. So, the penalty for covenant violation is death. The first covenant was broken. The penalty for that is death. Jesus bore the cost, the penalty for breaking the covenant. And so now he's elaborating on that. For where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who makes the covenant must be represented by animal sacrifices. For a covenant takes effect, it says only a death, but the actual literal translation is dead bodies. If you assume that this is to mean a testament or a will, there's only one dead body, right? It's the one who makes but this is in plural. So what's really happened here is that in a difficult verse to, translate and understand, the translators have applied their own understanding and twisted the language, the translation, to represent that understanding rather than attempt to grapple with the author's own understanding. So where there is a covenant, it's necessary that the death of the one who makes the covenant be represented by animal sacrifices. For a covenant is confirmed over dead bodies, or over the dead bodies being sacrificial animals, since it is never valid while the covenant maker is still ritually alive. So the covenant doesn't take effect until there's a sacrifice. You can agree on the terms, you can do whatever, you can say yes, but something has to be sacrificed, because that sacrifice indicates what you agree to have happen to you if you break the covenant. Or also, alternately, although very similarly, instead of where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. So he's talking about a broken covenant. He's talking about Christ as mediator. And so for where a covenant, but not just any covenant, a broken covenant is involved, instead of the death of the one who made it must be established, it is necessary for the death of the one who made the covenant to be born. Somebody, or a lot of somebodies, have to die. And it is not enforced while the covenant, so remember, the context here is a broken covenant. It's not enforced while the covenant maker lives. The covenant is in abeyance. A broken covenant is in abeyance until the penalty is served. So is this all clear?
It's clearer than at the beginning.
I think we probably need to go over it again.
Either way,
Next
you're gonna
week.
die, right?
What?
Either way, you're gonna die.
Well, the Christ died.
willfully.
Christ satisfied. The
He
point here,
willfully-
he's talking about a broken covenant.
Yeah,
There are a number of mind-boggling things here, but that Christ simultaneously satisfies the penalties under both covenants. And in the process, in doing that, brings forth the new covenant.
mhm,
Instead of a sacrificial animal to represent our deaths, Christ himself is the sacrifice. So there's no need for the penalty to be paid. And his sacrifice redeems those who
mhm.
were otherwise doomed under the old covenant. But what I was also going to say earlier is, I mean, besides a tightly woven argument, we've seen, the author is very typological. And if we simply switch from covenant to testament, nothing points forward to anything. Nothing is typological. Everything breaks down. And this becomes totally nonsensical, in my opinion. And the author is certainly not nonsensical. I mean, this is, we've looked at the typology that he uses, I think repeatedly over and over again. But you just don't get to a testament anywhere here.
So the breakdown wasn't with the author, it was with the scribe.
What?
The breakdown wasn't necessarily with the author, but with the scribe, the person doing the right, the translator.
The translator, yeah. Yeah, the translator, right. Among other things, it's a reminder that we always have to be careful about translations. And always that, in trying to understand the Bible, we begin with what genre is this, and then and what is, the overall intent. And then we move on to what is the intent of the author in specific passages. And that requires some sort of getting into the mind of a first century author. And we're not first century people. So that requires some effort. I mean, there's this whole notion that you just pick up the Bible and read it, that I don't think works very well. It doesn't mean what it says. Next week, we probably should go over this again since it's important, and I kind of suspect that everybody is caught unawares or whatever, taken by surprise, or not quite struggling to understand this.